Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio, and this is Webster Tarpley speaking to you as usual from Washington, D.C. Very glad you're with us today. We have a very full program centering primarily on events in Egypt, as you can imagine. Now, of course, if you've been listening to this program for any length of time, you know what this is. It is a classic CIA color revolution, people power coup, or postmodern putsch. It is one of the more ambitious ones. And on the other hand, it's from the point of view of the technique of the postmodern coup, it is not necessarily ideally set up. There are many important components of a postmodern coup that certainly are lacking. But anyway, it should be clear that on the one hand, any postmodern coup starts with real grievances. And the grievances in this case have to do with the world economic and financial depression, which is, of course, the handiwork of Wall Street derivatives mongers and their confreres in the city of London and other globalized bankers around the world. It goes far beyond the purview of any national government. The fact that the London Commodities Exchange drive up the price of food, especially wheat and bread, along with energy, be it things used for cooking or gasoline, heating oil, things like this, and, of course, then large levels of unemployment. The economic development of Egypt has been systematically strangled over many decades. Just think of John Foster Dulles' stubborn and odious rejection of Nasser's plans to build the Aswan High Dam. So those are the grievances. Now, you'd be much better off demanding the expropriation of Wall Street, the expropriation of foreign banks, the ban on derivatives, the tax on financial exchange, things of this sort. Instead, it's always possible, since people see what they see in front of their faces and necessarily don't have an analysis of what's going on, it's easy to take that resentment and direct it against the government. At the same time, there is a history of repression. There's a history of very serious repression, in particular against this entity known as the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood had been created by British intelligence back in 1926 as a counterweight to the nationalist and to some degree pro-development factions of the WAFD party, W-A-F-D. This party is still around, although it's a pale shadow of its former self. The nationalists of the WAFD were anti-British. Therefore, the British created another entity that would seem to be radical, seem to be anti-colonial in a very general way, anti-Western, but would focus its demands on things that did not really interfere with the British colonial tenure in Egypt. And during Nasser, they showed their true colors. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was the Muslim Brotherhood, which was the main opposition and tried to sabotage Nasser's policies, and this did not have a good outcome. There was repression already then, so that repression goes back. The other thing we have to remember, it's coming out of the Muslim Brotherhood with figures like Ayman Zawahiri. Well, they, as critical as they are today of the Muslim Brotherhood and its alleged compromises, those guys come out of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they are the ones who were instrumental then in the physical elimination of Sadat back in 1981, and those are the roots of the state of emergency that you've got going in Egypt now 30 years later. So there is some reason for this. Of course, it was then exploited by Mubarak. So this is in a thumbnail, the history of the entire thing. Now, the other thing to keep your focus on is the question of the youth bulge, the youth bulge across the Arab world, which is something that Zbigniew Brzezinski has focused on, something that he intends to exploit. This is now the post-9/11 generation. I call them, in many ways, the young nihilists, because they have no particular loyalties. They have no political outlook except these empty slogans like "we're against hierarchies" or "we're for dignity" or we want transparency, things like this. In other words, the ideology of Assange and company. So this group is the target now of the CIA, and they feel that by launching the events in Tunisia, they have successfully captured the imagination of this youth bulge, and they now expect that they can turn them against the various governments and bring down those governments. However, on the other hand, it has been clear that this was coming, and I hope I've contributed something myself to the creation of an awareness on the part of world governments that there is such a thing as a color revolution, there is such a thing as a people power coup, and also some idea of what it is and how you fight it. And Mubarak shows a mixed record in the Mubarak regime shows a mixed record in its ability to successfully deal with the color revolution. In Iran, we had a fairly successful resistance against the color revolution last year. So that's going to be the one thing to watch. The ability of governments to learn how the color revolution works and then, if necessary, take really ruthless measures. Because remember, within the framework of a color revolution, a journalist is not a journalist. That's pretty clear from what happened this past week. You look at people working for Al Jazeera. Those are not journalists at all. Those are agitators. Those are propagandists. Those are people who have a definite goal of destabilization of the country. So in the past 24 hours, we've got this situation where the U.S. Has administered another stab in the back. This is now getting to be quite a thing. The stab in the back to the Shah in 1978-79, the stab in the back to Marcos in 84-85, similar things done in other parts of the world. And now we find that the U.S. is pushing, as per the New York Times of yesterday evening, pushing a plan to stampede Mubarak into immediate resignation. They want to have a chaotic collapse of the old regime in order to maximize, it seems to me, chaos and confusion. Let me say right up front, what is the goal of the current operation in Egypt? Well, we know that for some years, 5-6 years now, since really the immediate aftermath of 9/11, the goal of the entire U.S. foreign policy has been to attempt to assemble a front of countries that would be Arab and Sunni at the same time, and to play that front against the Shiites and the Iranians and their allies, be it Hezbollah or other more radical groups, perhaps across the Arab world. Now, the problem that they ran into creating this front is that the entrenched regimes, the autocratic regimes, if you like, quasi-dictatorial, that had been around in the Arab world, be it Bouteflika in Algeria or Gaddafi in Libya or Sadat in Egypt or any others, Jordan monarchy also comes to mind, they're not interested in that kind of an adventure. They want stability. They want to maintain their power. They're not interested in apocalyptic scenarios of confrontation where the Sunnis and the Arabs fight the Iranians and the Shiites to the death and call that a strategy. They're just not interested. Yeah, so that's what they don't want. So therefore, you go to Mubarak. The problem with Mubarak is he's not dependent enough. He doesn't need NATO and the IMF. He doesn't follow their orders in the way that he would if he were a newly installed, highly unstable military dictator. So that's one of the reasons he has to go. It's this endless problem that the CIA faces. When you install somebody into power, they're captured, if you will, by the nation state that they're going to be ruling, and therefore from that moment on they begin to imperceptibly act more and more like a national leader and less like the CIA asset that they were at the beginning. And therefore this restless, constant tendency of the CIA to overthrow them. And we'll be back in a minute here on World Crisis Radio.